Welcome to Inside Medical Malpractice. This subject fascinates everyone everywhere because it affects everyone everywhere. My name is Chris Rokosh. I'm a registered nurse, legal consultant and educator, and the president of Connect Medical Legal Experts. Medical malpractice affects patients, families, nurses, doctors, midwives, healthcare institutions, the associations that define medical standards, lawyers, and the general public. Each month, we'll be looking at malpractice issues from different perspectives, featuring honest, candid, insightful interviews by people and professionals with a wealth of information to share. Thanks for spending time with me today. Now let's dive into this fascinating subject. Today I've been talking to Paul Cahill, a plaintiff's lawyer from Will Davidson in Toronto, and we've just recorded 3 separate podcasts on 3 separate medical malpractice trials that Paul ran in the last 12 months, which is a feat in itself. And at the time of this recording, he knows that he's got a successful outcome on 2 of the 3 of them and waiting for the final judgment on the 3rd one. And if you haven't listened to those, please do. I mean, Paul's discussion is very insightful and candid from the plaintiff lawyer's perspective, but with lots of advice for all of us, for doctors, nurses, for patients, and good lessons on the roles of advocacy and hard work and preparation. But now that we've talked to Paul about the facts of the cases and the outcomes and the highs and the lows, I want to just learn a little bit more about Paul with some more personal questions. I do know him professionally. He's a plaintiff's medical malpractice lawyer in Toronto. We've worked together, me as a nursing expert, him as a plaintiff's lawyer. We've spoken together at different conferences and different panels, and that's always been a pleasure. But tell me a little bit more, Paul, just about you. First of all, I think medical malpractice law, I think law probably has to be a tough profession, and medical malpractice law is tough within the tough. Why did you choose this? So
I would say that it chose me. I didn't come out of law school having any ambitions of doing medical malpractice. I knew very little about what medical malpractice law was. In fact, when I finished law school, I was probably more interested in doing criminal law. I'd done a little bit of legal aid work as a student doing criminal law, and I liked the idea of being in a courtroom, and I kind of thought that criminal law was what I wanted to do. I ended up, however, taking a job at Will Davidson, where I'm now a partner. I took an articling job there, and Will Davidson at that time was, and still mostly is, about 50% insurance defense work, and the other 50% is plaintiff personal injury work, with a heavy focus on motor vehicle litigation and other types of claims. The only lawyer that was really doing medical malpractice was Gary Will, who's my partner and at the time my mentor when I was an articling student. And I say medical malpractice chose me because I ended up working very closely with Gary in my articling year on a fairly large medical malpractice case that went to trial in Kingston. The name of the case was Williams and Bowler. And it's a case that's actually quoted a fair bit in the legal jurisprudence because it had a lot of really good outlines in terms of what the law is and the standard of care. It was also a very interesting case. And it was a long trial. It was about 6 weeks long, out of town. And the preparation that we put into it was significant. I would say probably about half of my articling time was spent working on this specific case. And it was through that being dropped into a very specific practice area of law that it was like a crash course for me. And it was almost an awakening in terms of really, really enjoying the subject matter. And I'd never, like I said, I'd never thought about doing it before, but just being in trial, learning the medicine, talking with the doctors. I was basically at Gary's hip the whole time. We would drive throughout Ontario in the weeks leading up to the trial, meeting with the experts in person. It was a case involving a misdiagnosis of a subarachnoid hemorrhage. It was caused by a ruptured cerebral aneurysm. And so we were consulting with neurosurgeons, neurologists, emergency room physicians, family doctors. And by the end of the trial, I was pretty convinced this is what I wanted to do with my career. And so from that point on, when I started practicing and got called to the bar, I really focused on developing my own cases and continued to work with Gary on some of his other medical malpractice cases. But at that time, and still now to some degree, there wasn't a lot of competition for medical malpractice cases. In fact, a lot of plaintiff personal injury lawyers couldn't get rid of them fast enough. So it was an area that allowed me to find a niche without having to fight with a lot of other lawyers for those files.
Right.
So I kind of had this sort of perfect storm of being introduced to a very specialized area of law that I really enjoyed and was interested in, and then coming out as a very junior lawyer, having the ability to actually attract new clients on my own, because most people didn't want to even look at these cases.
Has that changed now, in your perspective?
I mean, I think it's a little bit more competitive in terms of medical malpractice. I know for sure there's a lot of plaintiff personal injury lawyers that would like to do these cases on their own. There's a lot of opportunities for lawyers who are experienced in medical malpractice to co-counsel with plaintiff lawyers who may have the files, but maybe don't have the level of experience to feel comfortable running these cases.
Yeah.
So I do, like a lot of lawyers in this area, I do enter into co-counsel agreements with a lot of lawyers who may have less experience and then benefit from collaborating on a larger file together. But yeah, I think with the changes to the motor vehicle accident compensation scheme, because many people may know who are lawyers in this area, there's a lot of restrictions and threshold, and those cases in general are a little bit, there isn't as much revenue out there. So people are trying to broaden their practice areas into different areas.
Sure, that could certainly, I'm sure from your legal perspective, that's a hot topic all in itself. You could talk about
for sure.
for a day and a night.
Absolutely.
So, I know this is tough work and the stories are sad and none of these outcomes are good. As we've discussed already in the cases that your 3 trials in the last year, what keeps you going and gets you up every morning?
I'm very grateful for everything that I have in my life, my friends, my family, my partners, my legal partners, and my law firm, my clients, and my staff. I'm one of those people that I get up in the morning and I look forward to going to work.
That's great.
And I try to bike into work as much as I can. It's about a 10-kilometer bike ride, so I look forward to that, to get the fresh air and the exercise, and then get into the office and just try to feel like I'm making a difference in some people's lives. And for the most part, the clients that I have in my practice they're great people. They're nice people. They're grateful. They're happy with the services that they're getting. That kind of works its way back to me in terms of reinvigorating myself, right? When you get that positive feedback, when you get that win, when you get that client hugging you, at the end of a case because they're so happy that you were able to achieve this resolution for them.
Right.
So I definitely get a lot of joy in terms of what I do, and that gets me up in the morning.
That is so great to hear. And what are the kind of things that keep you up at night?
Finding good experts. I honestly, when you have a case and the facts seem pretty good, you know that the problem is always going to be finding the right expert to say the right thing.
Right.
And you know that the difference between having that and not having that is a difference between a case settling or going to trial and being successful, or having to abandon the case or losing at trial if you don't have the right expert saying the right thing. And over time, as you develop experience in this area, you get a better sense of who the right expert is in terms of the specialty area.
Right.
And you start to learn that, just because you happen to need a neurologist in a particular case, you start learning how even neurologists or, these subspecialists have further subspecialties and interests that isn't quite necessarily obvious based on their designation. So you realize that, no, I need a neurologist who practices in the community, who, focuses on stroke.
Right.
Or something like that.
Got it.
So you learn that. But what always kind of, assuming you can find that person, then it's about getting them to say the right thing. And I would say receiving draft expert reports for the first time causes me the most amount of stress.
Why is that?
In my life? Well, because, doctors are not lawyers and they don't understand the law. And as much as you may explain it to them, I think they all grapple with the concept of the balance of probabilities, which is a fairly low standard,
Yes.
and certainly not anywhere close to the scientific standards that doctors are accustomed to.
Right.
So I find that they can sometimes in their reports be a little bit ambivalent or equivocal in their opinion because they're cautious of the fact that, it's hard to know what would have happened from a scientific perspective because we didn't do the testing and there's no studies on it. So I find, I guess the best way to put it is sometimes I find experts pull their punches a little bit in terms of how they write their reports. Trying to be fair, I guess, but also maybe not realizing that the civil standard is much lower and they can, arrive at certain opinions that, it's more likely than not that something would have happened.
Right.
So when we get the draft reports and they seem a little lukewarm, it becomes, an issue of having to speak with the expert and understand why they wrote things that way. And ultimately, helping them to formulate an opinion that, as written, will give you the opportunity to either settle the case or be successful at trial.
Right.
And sometimes it's difficult conversations to have with these doctors. I don't particularly like calling up a doctor who's, 20 years older than me, been practicing in a very specialized area of medicine for 40 years, and telling him how his report, the way he wrote it is not really helpful, and trying to, get him to change it. For the most part, they're great to talk to, and it's not a problem, but sometimes it can be an awkward conversation. I don't really look forward to that sometimes.
Yeah, no, I hear you. Well, working with a lot of medical experts, that's not an uncommon discussion that we have between the lawyers, sort of, quarterbacking that between the two is just finding that fine line of what you can say and defend, and not overstep, but be helpful to the case, whichever side you're working on. So it's a tough spot all the way around. You're not alone in that, I guess is what I'm trying to say. How do you hope that your work in malpractice might influence healthcare outcomes? Because I'm assuming that that's one of your goals.
Well, absolutely. And I don't know how much, I'm not involved in any way whatsoever in terms of the administration of healthcare in the province. I'm just a lawyer that tries to get, people money for when things go wrong. It really is what my role is. Could it have the potential benefit of increasing patient safety? I think so. I think certainly hospitals are, in my experience anyways, seem to take a more formal approach to being faced with a lawsuit and having an internal review of systems and protocols and staff to see, where things may have gone wrong and how that can be improved. The way it works in Ontario is we're not privy to any of that. It's protected by legislation. It's confidential. So I don't know how much that happens, but I have a sense that, when there's sort of an obvious error in the hospital, for instance, I had a case where a man had an orthopedic injury and he was admitted because he needed dialysis. But he also needed to go to the fracture clinic. And when he was taken to the fracture clinic, they refused to see him because it was only for outpatient. He was an inpatient. And so this gentleman ended up not getting orthopedic follow-up because of that reason. And so something like that, you could see how a hospital is like, well, that doesn't make any sense. We got to make sure that people who are inpatients also get access to the fracture clinic.
Right.
So I think lawsuits like this would do that. I think the other thing that lawsuits do is I think that they increase accountability on the part of physicians and healthcare providers for medical errors. And there is, I think, a perception amongst the public that, doctors are untouchable and that they can get away with, being negligent and will not be held accountable for it because of their position. They hold a very high and prestigious position in society. And there's a sense that, doctors won't say, testify against other doctors, and it's all but impossible to successfully litigate a case against the doctor, so why even bother trying? And I think, litigating these cases successfully shows that they aren't untouchable and that they are human and they do make mistakes. And sadly, sometimes those mistakes cause harm.
Right.
And in our society, we believe that where people cause harm because of negligence, that they're responsible to pay for those damages.
Right.
And, I think having that mentality that it's really about compensation and accountability and taking responsibility for, where someone's made a mistake in good faith. It doesn't, I don't think any doctor wants to harm patients. I think they all come to work every morning with the greatest of intentions to do their best. And I think that's amazing. But, sometimes people make mistakes and it's not, I'm going to say it's not a big deal. Like, I guess for lawyers it is, but I think it isn't so much. But for people, it does happen, and they should get that compensation. So I think that helps as well.
Sure. Well, I think you did a really good job there of sort of breaking it down into the blackest and whitest sense and just kind of factual. And that was a real revelation for me to learn about medical malpractice, that the laws are there to protect the public or to compensate the public who've been injured at the hands of healthcare providers, and not to make health doctors and nurses' lives miserable, which is sort of a common perception within healthcare. But so thank you for explaining it with that level of clarity. So you're raising 3 boys, as we've heard. Will you encourage them to go into law or medicine, or would you say stay away from that? It's tough.
Honestly, I warn my sons about law, that it's a tough job. You're fighting with people. There's a lot of things that are outside of your control. It's stressful. And sometimes, it doesn't feel like you're really helping people. Like you're getting people money for when they've been injured and so on. And I think that's really important. But, you think about what would happen if the world ended and we had to restart society from scratch. Probably wouldn't be an important position for lawyers at that initial stage. You know what I mean? We're not the essential, profession. Unlike medicine, right? You always need healers. You need, doctors. And so, honestly, I tell my sons that if they're interested in a professional career, they should think about medicine, because I think medicine is an amazing profession where you are literally helping people every day. And it's collaborative, and it's not adversarial like my job is. You're there to help people in a team environment. So I encourage them to go into medicine, not law.
Interesting. And have you yourself ever had that thought that you should have been a doctor instead of a lawyer?
I was focused on other things in high school, and it kind of...
What?
I really wanted to, pursue music, and I was interested in, school wasn't a big priority for me. So I was by the time I decided to get my act together, I didn't have the scientific and mathematical foundation to go into medicine. But I never had that ambition. Like, I always did want to be a lawyer. So, I think I ended up where I wanted to be.
Well, I forgot. I knew that about you, that you have a musical background. Just talk for just a second about that.
Yeah, so I, in high school got interested in playing music and playing in some bands. And, I maybe as I get older, I realize that it can be a little bit all in or not at all. And I got all into music and, dropped out of high school and played in some bands for about a year and a half, and realized that I was going to be completely impoverished for my whole life if I kept this up. And it scared me straight back into school and got me straight to law school.
Got it. Right. I was listening to some quite famous musician talk a couple of days ago on a podcast, and he was talking about his Freedom 95 plan, because you're right. I mean, it's not always or often a financial success. But it's a love and it's a lifestyle for some people. So
absolutely.
Yeah. So, I just want to say, I want to ask you one more question, Paul, but before I do, I just want to say thank you so much. I really have appreciated your sharing of your knowledge, your candid openness about yourself and your love for your work and your advocacy and your, band. But if you could go back now and give yourself a little bit of advice as your younger self, what would it be?
I would tell myself to, stay the course and keep working hard. I know when I think I mentioned in another section of our interview that, I didn't have a lot of good successes as a trial lawyer in my first 5 to 7 years of practice. And I tried a bunch of cases, and I lost a lot of them. They weren't medical malpractice cases, but I did lose them. And to be fair, they were tough cases, but it was discouraging. It's very discouraging to, particularly jury trials, right, where they tell you to your face that they didn't like your case. And having had those experiences, there were times when I wondered whether, I'm on the right path. And I think I persevered and I continued on. And I almost feel like, those experiences that I had that weren't necessarily positive outcomes, but I went through the motions of working hard and preparing the case and doing my best, that as I became more experienced in this area, particularly medical malpractice, it served me really well to go into these cases with having had the experience of not being successful on a number of cases. Because it taught me that, the worst thing that can happen is you lose.
Yeah.
But I always took from that I'd rather lose than not try.
Right. So stay the course. That's the advice. Stay the course. That's great advice. Thank you. So we'll wrap that up there. And just quick recap. This is Paul Cahill from Will Davidson in Toronto. If you're a lawyer looking for co-counsel in a medical malpractice case, or a member of the public out there that would like to talk to someone about a potential malpractice case, you can find him. It's Paul Cahill, Cahill, at Will Davidson in Toronto. Thank you once again, Paul. It's been an absolute pleasure.